I never thought I'd be here, sitting in our dimly lit kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at a stack of bills that seemed to grow taller with each passing day. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound breaking the silence of our small apartment in downtown Seattle. I rubbed my tired eyes, trying to focus on the numbers that danced before me. This wasn't how I imagined my first year of marriage would be. My name is Kaylee, and a year ago, I married the love of my life, Ethan. We met at a local coffee shop where I used to work part-time during college. He was charming, with his crooked smile and the way he always remembered my name, even when I forgot to wear my name tag. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love for indie music and dreams of traveling the world. After dating for 2 years, Ethan proposed on a rainy day at Kerry Park, overlooking the Seattle skyline. It was perfect, despite the drizzle that left us both soaked to the bone. We laughed it off, seeing it as a sign of good luck. If only I had known then what I know now. The first few months of our marriage were a whirlwind of happiness. We moved into a cozy apartment in Capitol Hill, spent weekends exploring the city's hidden gems, and dreamed about our future together. But slowly, reality began to creep in. I noticed Ethan becoming more withdrawn, spending more time on his phone, and making hushed calls when he thought I wasn't listening. It was on a chilly autumn evening when the truth finally came out. I had just returned from my office job at a local tech startup, exhausted from a long day of meetings and deadlines. Ethan was sitting on our second-hand couch, his head in his hands. When he looked up at me, his eyes were red-rimmed and filled with shame. "Kaylee," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." My heart sank as he revealed the extent of his financial troubles. Credit card debt, gambling losses, impulsive purchases, it all added up to a staggering $15,000. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. How could he have hidden this from me? How could I have been so blind? That night, as I lay awake next to Ethan's sleeping form, I made a decision. I loved him, and I believed in us. We would get through this together. Little did I know the toll it would take on me, on us. The next day, I threw myself into action. I scoured the internet for financial advice, created spreadsheets to track our expenses, and started looking for ways to increase our income. My days became a blur of work and more work. I took on extra shifts at the office, staying late into the night to prove my worth for a potential promotion. On weekends, I picked up freelance writing gigs, churning out content for various blogs and websites. Ethan, to his credit, seemed remorseful. He promised to do better, to find a higher-paying job, to cut back on his expenses. But as the months wore on, his efforts seemed half-hearted at best. There was always an excuse. The job market was tough, he had unexpected expenses, he needed to maintain appearances for potential networking opportunities. I sold my cherished collection of vinyl records, including a rare first pressing of Nirvana's Bleach that I had found at a garage sale years ago. My weekly yoga classes at the studio down the street became a luxury I could no longer afford. The small savings account I had been building since college, dreaming of one day using it for a down payment on a house, was slowly drained. Our friends started to notice the change in our lifestyle. We turned down invitations to dinner parties and weekend getaways, making excuses about being busy with work. In reality, every spare dollar was going towards paying off Ethan's debt. I started to feel isolated, trapped in a cycle of work and worry. There were moments when I questioned everything. Late at night, when the weight of our financial burden felt crushingly heavy, I wondered if I had made a mistake. Was this what love was supposed to feel like? Sacrifice to the point of losing myself? But then Ethan would do something that reminded me why I fell in love with him. He'd leave a handwritten note in my lunchbox, telling me how much he appreciated me. Or he'd surprise me with a homemade dinner on a rare night when I came home early. These small gestures kept the flame of hope alive in my heart. As the months turned into a year, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The debt was slowly shrinking, and I felt a sense of pride in what I had accomplished. I imagined the day when we'd be debt-free, able to start building the life we had dreamed of together. Finally, after countless sacrifices and sleepless nights, I made the last payment. As I hit the submit button on the final transfer, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over me. We had done it. We were free. I waited for Ethan to come home that evening, my heart light for the first time in months. I expected tears of joy, a heartfelt thank you, maybe even a celebration. What I got instead was a casual "Hey, babe" as he walked through the door, seemingly oblivious to the momentous occasion. "Ethan," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice, "I made the last payment today. We're debt-free." He looked up from his phone, a flicker of something, relief? Guilt? Passing over his face. "Oh, that's great," he said, his tone far from matching the significance of the moment. "Hey, I was thinking we could go out for dinner tomorrow. You know, for our anniversary." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. This wasn't the reaction I had hoped for, but maybe he just needed time to process it. Maybe the anniversary dinner would be his way of showing his appreciation. As I went to bed that night, I tried to focus on the positive. We had overcome a huge obstacle together. Sure, it hadn't been easy, and Ethan's contribution hadn't been what I'd hoped for, but we had made it. Tomorrow was our anniversary, and it felt like the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. Little did I know that the dinner Ethan was planning would change everything. As I drifted off to sleep, I allowed myself to hope, one last time, that the sacrifices I had made would be worth it in the end. The morning of our anniversary dawned bright and clear, a rarity for Seattle in early spring. I woke up feeling hopeful for the first time in months. As I got ready for work, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of our dinner plans that evening. Maybe this was the turning point we needed, a chance to reconnect and remember why we fell in love in the first place. I spent the day at the office in a daze, my mind constantly drifting to what the evening might hold. My coworker, Lisa, noticed my unusually chipper mood. "What's got you so smiley today, Kaylee?" she asked as we grabbed coffee in the break room. "It's my anniversary," I replied, unable to keep the excitement out of my voice. "Ethan's taking me out to dinner tonight." Lisa's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "That's great, hun. Where's he taking you?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "He said it was a surprise." As I left work that evening, Lisa caught me by the elevator. "Have a great time tonight, Kaylee. You deserve it." There was something in her tone that I couldn't quite place, but I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. At home, I spent hours getting ready. I wanted everything to be perfect. I chose the dress Ethan had once said was his favorite, a deep emerald green that brought out the gold flecks in my hazel eyes. As I applied my makeup, I found myself humming softly, feeling like the girl who had fallen head over heels for the charming guy at the coffee shop. Before leaving, I grabbed the small gift I had bought for Ethan, a vintage watch I had found at a little antique shop in Pioneer Square. It had cost more than I should have spent, given our recent financial struggles, but I wanted to mark this new chapter in our lives with something special. The Uber dropped me off in front of Carnley's, one of Seattle's most upscale restaurants. My heart skipped a beat. We had always talked about coming here for a special occasion, but it had always been out of our price range. The fact that Ethan had chosen this place made me think that maybe, just maybe, he understood the magnitude of what we'd been through, what I'd been through, this past year. As I walked in, the Maître d' smiled at me. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked. I nodded, a bit surprised that Ethan had made the reservation under my name. "Your party is already seated. Please, follow me." I followed him through the dimly lit restaurant, my anticipation growing with each step. But as we approached the table, I felt my stomach drop. Ethan wasn't alone. His parents, Robert and Margaret, were there, along with a young woman I didn't recognize. Ethan stood as I approached, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, guilt, regret, in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by a cold, unfamiliar look. "Kaylee," he said, his voice oddly formal. "Thank you for coming." I stood there, frozen, as the reality of the situation slowly sank in. This wasn't a romantic anniversary dinner. This was something else entirely. "What's going on?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable for a moment before that mask of indifference slipped back into place. "Kaylee, I want you to meet Amber," he said, gesturing to the young woman beside him. She couldn't have been more than 25, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer dress that probably cost more than our monthly rent. "I don't understand," I said, even though a part of me was starting to piece it together. The late-night phone calls, the sudden interest in his appearance, the half-hearted attempts at finding a better job, it all started to make a sickening kind of sense. "Kaylee," Ethan said, his voice devoid of any warmth or emotion, "I want a divorce." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the back of a nearby chair to steady myself, barely registering the smug looks on his parents' faces or the pitying glance from Amber. "But, why?" I asked, hating how small and broken my voice sounded. I thought we were starting over. The debt is paid off. We can finally start building our life together." Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "Our life together. Kaylee, don't you get it? There is no our anymore. You served your purpose. I needed someone to help me get out of debt, and you did that. But now I need someone who can help me move forward. Someone who understands the kind of life I want to live." I felt like I had been slapped. All those months of sacrifice, of putting my dreams on hold, of giving everything I had, it had all been for nothing. Or rather, it had all been for him, with no regard for me or our supposed partnership. You used me," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Now, Margaret, Ethan's mother, chimed in with fake concern. "Let's not be dramatic, dear. Ethan simply realized that you too want different things in life. It happens. No need to make a scene." I turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since I'd arrived. The woman who had welcomed me into her family with open arms now looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her designer shoe. "Different things?" I repeated, my voice growing stronger as anger began to replace the shock and hurt. "Like what? A partner who's willing to stand by you through thick and thin? Someone who believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself? Or do you mean someone who's willing to sacrifice everything for the person they love?" Ethan at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Kaylee, please. This isn't the place for this conversation. I thought doing it here would make it easier. A clean break, you know? A clean break. As if the last 3 years of our lives together, the vows we'd made, the future we'd planned, could be erased with a single conversation in an overpriced restaurant." I looked around the table, taking in the faces of these people who I had once considered family. Robert, Ethan's father, wouldn't meet my eye, suddenly very interested in the menu in front of him. Margaret was still wearing that look of smug superiority, as if she'd won some sort of competition I didn't know I was part of. Amber looked uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to remove her hand from where it rested on Ethan's arm. And Ethan just looked impatient, as if he was annoyed that I was taking too long to accept this new reality he had decided for us. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the hurt, all the betrayal, all the anger I felt, I pushed it down, locked it away. Instead, I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, and looked Ethan directly in the eye. "Okay," I said, my voice steady and calm. Ethan blinked, clearly thrown off by my response. "Okay," he repeated. "Yes, okay," I said. "If this is what you want, then okay. I'll move out as soon as possible." I could see the relief wash over Ethan's face, quickly followed by a flicker of disappointment. Had he been expecting a scene? Tears? Begging? Well, he wasn't going to get it. Not from me. Not anymore. I turned to leave, but then remembered the small gift box in my purse. I pulled it out and placed it on the table. "Happy anniversary, Ethan," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I hope you enjoy the watch. It's vintage, kind of like our marriage, I guess. Short-lived and ultimately worthless." With that, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, my head held high. I could feel the eyes of other diners on me, probably wondering about the drama unfolding at the table I just left. But I didn't care. Let them stare. Let them wonder. As soon as I was outside, I gulped in the cool evening air, feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time since I'd walked into that restaurant. I started walking, not really sure where I was going, just knowing I needed to put as much distance between myself and that table as possible. I ended up at the pier, staring out at the dark waters of Puget Sound. The Space Needle glowed in the distance, a beacon of light in the Seattle skyline. I used to love that view. Now, it just reminded me of all the dreams Ethan and I had shared, dreams that had turned out to be nothing but lies. As I stood there, the full weight of what had just happened began to sink in. My marriage was over. The life I had worked so hard to build, the future I had sacrificed so much for, it was all gone, swept away in a single evening. For a moment, I considered breaking down right there on the pier. I could feel the tears pressing against the back of my eyes, the sobs building in my throat. But then I thought about the smug looks on their faces, the casual way Ethan had dismissed our entire relationship, and I felt a new emotion rising within me, determination. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew I could count on. "Lisa," I said when she answered. "I need a place to stay tonight. And I need a lawyer." As I hung up, I took one last look at the Seattle skyline. This city had been the backdrop for my love story with Ethan, but it would also be the setting for my comeback. Because if Ethan thought I was going to just roll over and let him walk all over me, he had another thing coming. I hailed a cab and gave the driver Lisa's address. As we pulled away from the pier, I made a silent promise to myself. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would be the author of my own happiness. I woke up the next morning on Lisa's couch, my head pounding and my eyes puffy from a night of intermittent crying and fitful sleep. For a moment, I hoped it had all been a bad dream. But the unfamiliar surroundings and the ache in my chest quickly reminded me that it was all too real. Lisa was already up, bustling around her small kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air, a small comfort in the midst of chaos. She handed me a steaming mug and sat down beside me. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle. I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through me before answering. I don't know. Angry. Hurt. Confused. All of the above. Lisa nodded sympathetically. "That's understandable. Have you thought about what you want to do next?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. What did I want to do next? The life I had planned, the future I had worked so hard for, had crumbled in a single evening. But as I sat there, sipping my coffee and staring out Lisa's window at the Seattle skyline, I felt a resolve forming within me. "I want a divorce," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "And I want it on my terms." Lisa squeezed my hand. "I've got a friend who's a great divorce lawyer. Her name's Sarah Chen. I'll give her a call and see if she can fit you in today." True to her word, Lisa managed to get me an appointment with Sarah that afternoon. As I walked into the sleek downtown office, I felt a mix of trepidation and determination. Sarah turned out to be a petite woman with a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put me at ease. "So, Kaylee," she said after I'd recounted the events of the previous night, "it sounds like your husband has made his intentions clear. The question is, what are your intentions?" I took a deep breath. "I want out. But I also want, I don't know, justice. Compensation for everything I've sacrificed." Sarah nodded, a glint of understanding in her eyes. "Given what you've told me about your financial contributions and the sacrifices you've made, we have a strong case for a favorable settlement. But I need to know, are you prepared for what might be a difficult battle?" I thought about Ethan's smug face at the restaurant, about his parents' disdainful looks, about the years I'd spent working myself to the bone to pay off his debts. "I'm ready," I said firmly. We spent the next few hours going over the details of my marriage, our finances, and the events leading up to Ethan's betrayal. By the time I left Sarah's office, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. For the first time since that disastrous dinner, I felt like I had a plan. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed at Lisa's, unable to face going back to the apartment I'd shared with Ethan. I threw myself into preparing for the divorce, gathering documents, and making lists of our assets. It was during this process that I made a startling discovery. I was going through our old financial records when I noticed something odd. There were several large deposits into our joint account over the past few months, deposits that didn't match up with either of our incomes. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I dug deeper. What I found made my blood boil. Ethan had been embezzling money from his company. The sudden influx of cash explained his newfound interest in expensive restaurants and designer clothes. It also explained why he'd been so eager to have me pay off his debts. He was covering his tracks. I immediately called Sarah with this new information. "This changes things," she said, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "If we can prove this, we'll have significant leverage in the divorce proceedings." Armed with this new knowledge, I felt a shift in my emotions. The hurt and confusion began to give way to a cold, calculated anger. Ethan hadn't just betrayed our marriage, he'd broken the law, and he'd used me to cover it up. A week after that fateful dinner, I finally gathered the courage to go back to my apartment. Ethan had been staying with his parents, according to the terse text messages he'd sent me. As I unlocked the door, I braced myself for the flood of memories I knew would assault me. But something strange happened as I stepped inside. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by nostalgia or sadness, I felt nothing. The space that had once been our home now felt foreign, like a stage set for a life that was no longer mine. I spent the next few hours methodically going through our belongings, making lists of what was mine, what was Ethan's, and what we'd acquired together. As I worked, a plan began to form in my mind. Ethan thought he could discard me like yesterday's news. Well, he was about to learn that I wasn't going down without a fight. I called Sarah that evening to update her on my progress and share my ideas. She listened carefully, occasionally interjecting with legal advice or words of caution. When I finished, there was a moment of silence on the line. "Kaylee," Sarah said finally, "I want you to understand something. What you're proposing, it's not going to be easy. Ethan and his family might fight back hard. Are you sure you're prepared for that?" I thought about the years I'd spent supporting Ethan, about the dreams I'd put on hold, about the smug looks on his and his parents' faces at that restaurant. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I'm done being the victim in this story." Over the next few days, I put my plan into motion. I started by reaching out to some of Ethan's colleagues under the guise of planning a surprise for him. The information I gathered only confirmed my suspicions about his embezzlement. Next, I contacted a real estate agent about selling our apartment. Given the booming Seattle housing market, it was worth significantly more than when we'd bought it. I also started the process of dividing our other assets, making sure to document everything meticulously. Through it all, I maintained a facade of calm. When Ethan called, demanding to know what I was doing, I simply told him that I was following our lawyer's advice. His frustration was palpable, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me upset. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself settling into a new routine. Mornings were spent at my job, where I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor. Evenings were dedicated to building my case and preparing for the divorce proceedings. I also started reconnecting with old friends and rediscovering parts of myself that I'd neglected during my marriage. I joined a local book club, started taking yoga classes again, and even signed up for a painting workshop at a community center in Capitol Hill. It was during one of these painting classes that I had an epiphany. As I stood in front of my canvas, brush in hand, I realized that this divorce wasn't just about getting back at Ethan. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity, my future. With this realization came a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. The anger and hurt were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but they no longer controlled me. Instead, they fueled my determination to come out of this stronger than ever. As the date of our first court appearance approached, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and serenity. I had done everything I could to prepare. I had the truth on my side, and a team of supportive friends and professionals backing me up. The night before the court date, I sat in my half-empty apartment, sipping a glass of wine and looking out at the Seattle skyline. The Space Needle glowed in the distance, a beacon of light in the darkness. I thought about how much had changed in just a few short weeks, how much I had changed. I picked up my phone and opened my email. The divorce papers, meticulously prepared by Sarah, were ready to be served. My finger hovered over the send button for a moment as I considered the magnitude of what I was about to do. Then, with a deep breath, I pressed send. The papers were on their way to Ethan, his parents, and their lawyer. There was no going back now. As I set my phone down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: I was ready to face them head on. I raised my glass in a silent toast to myself, to the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. Here's to new beginnings, I whispered into the quiet of the night. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. But tonight, in this moment of calm before the storm, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope for the future. A future that, for the first time in a long time, belonged entirely to me. The morning of the court date dawned grey and drizzly, typical Seattle weather that matched my mood perfectly. I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting the collar of my navy blue blazer, trying to project an air of confidence I didn't entirely feel. This was it. The moment of truth. As I stepped out of my Uber in front of the King County Courthouse, I saw Ethan and his family arriving. They were huddled under a large black umbrella, looking like a united front. For a moment, I felt a pang of loneliness. Then I remembered Lisa, Sarah, and all the friends who had supported me through this ordeal. I might be walking into that courtroom alone, but I was far from unsupported. The proceedings were a blur of legal jargon and tense silences. I sat there, my back straight, my face a mask of calm, as our lawyers presented their cases. Sarah was brilliant, methodically laying out the evidence of Ethan's betrayal and financial misdeeds. I could see the shock on the faces of Ethan's parents as the truth of his embezzlement came to light. Ethan himself seemed to shrink in his seat, his earlier bravado evaporating with each damning piece of evidence. When it was all over, the judge ruled largely in my favor. I was to keep the apartment and half of our joint assets. Ethan would be responsible for paying me a substantial sum in alimony, given my contributions to paying off his debts. As for the evidence of embezzlement, that would be turned over to the proper authorities for further investigation. As we filed out of the courtroom, I caught Ethan's eye. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I had fallen in love with, vulnerable, uncertain. But then his mother laid a hand on his arm, and his face hardened once more. "This isn't over, Kaylee," he hissed as he passed me. I simply smiled, a cold, satisfied smile that I hardly recognized as my own. "Oh, I think it is, Ethan," I replied calmly. "Have a nice life." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. I had movers come to pack up Ethan's things and deliver them to his parents' house. I changed the locks on the apartment and started the process of removing Ethan's name from all our joint accounts and utilities. It was during this time that I received an unexpected call from Amber, Ethan's new wife. Her voice was shaky on the phone, a far cry from the confident woman I had met at that fateful dinner. "Kaylee," she said, I think I've made a terrible mistake." I listened in stunned silence as she poured out her story. Ethan had swept her off her feet with grand gestures and promises of a luxurious life together. But in the weeks since their hasty marriage, the reality of who Ethan truly was had begun to set in. "He's not who I thought he was," Amber said, her voice thick with tears. "He's controlling, manipulative. And now with this embezzlement scandal, I don't know what to do." A part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to revel in the fact that Ethan's perfect new life was already crumbling. But mostly, I just felt sad. Sad for Amber, sad for the man Ethan could have been, sad for the years I had wasted. "Amber," I said gently, "you have options. There are people who can help you. You don't have to stay in a situation that makes you unhappy or unsafe." We talked for a while longer, and by the end of the call, Amber had a plan to reach out to a domestic violence support group. As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that I had escaped a similar fate, anger at Ethan for continuing to hurt people, and a renewed determination to move forward with my life. The next day, I decided it was time to start making my apartment truly mine. I spent the morning browsing furniture stores in downtown Seattle, picking out pieces that reflected my own style rather than the compromise Ethan and I had struck. As I was leaving my favorite home decor shop in Pike Place Market, arms full of new throw pillows and a colorful area rug, I quite literally ran into someone. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, trying to keep my purchases from tumbling to the ground. "No worries, let me help you with that," a deep voice replied. I looked up to see a tall, dark-haired man with kind eyes and a warm smile. He introduced himself as Alex and insisted on helping me carry my bags to my car. As we walked and chatted, I found myself smiling and laughing in a way I hadn't in months. When we reached my car, Alex hesitated for a moment before asking if I'd like to grab a coffee sometime. For a split second, I thought about declining. Was I ready to even think about dating again? But then I remembered my promise to myself to embrace new beginnings. I'd love to, I heard myself say. That evening, as I was arranging my new purchases in the apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Turn on the news," it read. Curious, I flipped on the TV to see Ethan's face plastered across the screen. The news anchor was reporting on his arrest for embezzlement. I sank onto my couch, a tumult of emotions washing over me. There was a certain satisfaction in seeing justice served, but also a deep sadness for the man I had once loved. I thought about calling Lisa or Sarah to talk it through, but instead, I decided to take a walk. The streets of Capitol Hill were alive with the energy of a Friday night. As I wandered past bustling restaurants and lively bars, I felt strangely disconnected from the scenes of happiness and carefree fun around me. My life had changed so drastically in such a short time, and I was still trying to find my footing in this new reality. I found myself at Volunteer Park, a place Ethan and I used to come for picnics in happier times. As I sat on a bench overlooking the Seattle skyline, I allowed myself to really feel everything I'd been holding back. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, but also the hope, the excitement for the future, the pride in my own strength. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. "Hi Kaylee, it's Alex from the market today. Just wanted to say it was great meeting you. Looking forward to that coffee." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the unseasonably mild evening. Maybe, just maybe, things were looking up. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of missed calls and text messages. News of Ethan's arrest had spread, and it seemed like everyone wanted to check on me or get the inside scoop. I ignored most of them, only responding to messages from close friends to assure them I was okay. As I sipped my morning coffee, looking out over the Seattle skyline from my apartment window, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The storm I had been dreading, the confrontation I had been preparing for, it had all come to pass. And I had survived. Not just survived, but come out stronger. I spent the day doing something I hadn't done in years, absolutely nothing. I lounged on my couch, binge-watched my favorite shows, ordered in from my favorite Thai place on Broadway. It felt decadent, almost rebellious after years of constantly working and worrying. As evening fell, I decided to take another walk. This time, my steps felt lighter, more purposeful. I ended up at a small art gallery in Pioneer Square, losing myself in the vibrant colors and bold strokes of the paintings on display. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice beside me said. I turned to see an older woman, her silver hair styled in an elegant bob, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "It really is," I agreed. We fell into an easy conversation about art and life. Martha, as she introduced herself, was a retired art teacher who now volunteered at the gallery. As we talked, I found myself opening up about the tumultuous events of the past few weeks. Martha listened attentively, her face a mix of sympathy and admiration. When I finished, she laid a gentle hand on my arm. "My dear," she said, "do you know what I see when I look at you? I see a masterpiece in progress. Life has thrown some dark colors your way, but look how beautifully you're incorporating them into your canvas." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I had been so focused on surviving, on getting through each day, that I hadn't stopped to appreciate how far I'd come, how much I'd grown. As I walked home that night, Martha's words echoed in my mind. A masterpiece in progress. That's what I was. That's what we all are, really. Our lives are constantly evolving, shaped by our experiences, our choices, our reactions to the unexpected twists and turns of fate. I thought about Ethan, about the life we had shared and the future we had planned. There was still a part of me that mourned for what could have been. But that part was getting smaller every day, overshadowed by my growing excitement for the future, on my own terms. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and, on a whim, started looking at art classes in the area. Maybe it was time to pick up a new hobby, to add some new colors to my life's canvas. As I scrolled through the options, my phone buzzed with a text from Alex, confirming our coffee date for the next day. I found myself smiling, a genuine, hopeful smile that felt foreign on my face after so many months of stress and sadness. I fell asleep that night with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the journey. Whatever came next, I knew I had the strength to face it. After all, I was a masterpiece in progress, and my story was far from over. The weeks following Ethan's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and new experiences. I found myself navigating a world that was both familiar and strange, like returning to a childhood home to find all the furniture rearranged. The city I had called home for years suddenly felt new, full of possibilities I had never noticed before. My coffee date with Alex turned into dinner, which turned into long walks along the waterfront, deep conversations about life and dreams, and a blossoming friendship that hinted at the potential for something more. But I was cautious, taking things slow, determined not to lose myself in another relationship before I had fully found myself again. At work, I threw myself into new projects with renewed vigor. My boss, noticing my increased productivity and innovative ideas, called me into his office one Friday afternoon. "Kaylee," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I've been impressed with your work lately. There's a new position opening up in our San Francisco office. It's a step up, more responsibility, better pay. I think you'd be perfect for it." I sat there, stunned. A promotion. A chance to start fresh in a new city. It was an incredible opportunity, but also terrifying. Seattle had been my home for so long. Could I really leave it all behind? "Can I have some time to think about it?" I asked. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. Take the weekend. Let me know on Monday." That weekend was a blur of pros and cons lists, late-night conversations with Lisa, and long walks through my favorite Seattle neighborhoods. On Sunday evening, I found myself at Kerry Park, looking out over the city skyline. The Space Needle stood tall against the setting sun, a familiar landmark in a city that had seen me through so much. As I stood there, I thought about all that had happened in the past few months. The betrayal, the pain, the struggle to find myself again. But I also thought about the strength I had discovered, the friendships that had deepened, the new connections I had made. In that moment, looking out over the city I had called home for so long, I made my decision. It was time for a new chapter. Monday morning, I walked into my boss's office with a mix of nervousness and excitement. "I'll take the job," I said, my voice steady and sure. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. Packing up my apartment, saying goodbye to friends, tying up loose ends. Alex and I had a long talk about my move. We agreed to stay in touch, to see where things might go, but without any pressure or expectations. Before I knew it, I was standing in my empty apartment, suitcases by my feet, taking one last look around. So many memories in these walls, both good and bad. But as I turned to leave, I didn't feel sadness. Instead, I felt a sense of anticipation, of excitement for what lay ahead. The drive down the coast to San Francisco was cathartic. I took my time, stopping at small coastal towns, hiking in beautiful state parks, allowing myself to breathe and reflect. By the time I crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, I felt ready for whatever this new city had in store for me. My new apartment in San Francisco was small but charming, with a tiny balcony that offered a sliver of a view of the bay. As I unpacked my boxes, I came across the painting supplies I had bought back in Seattle but never used. On a whim, I set up a small easel on the balcony and started to paint. Hours slipped by as I lost myself in colors and shapes, trying to capture the essence of my new view. When I finally stepped back, I was surprised to find that what I had created wasn't a landscape at all, but an abstract piece full of vibrant colors and bold strokes. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive with energy and possibility. Just like me, I realized with a smile. My new job was challenging but exciting. I found myself working with a diverse team on projects that pushed me out of my comfort zone. There were late nights and stressful deadlines, but also moments of triumph when we solved a particularly tricky problem or landed a big client. One day, about a month into my new job, my boss stopped by my desk. "Kaylee, there's a client meeting this afternoon. I'd like you to lead the presentation." I felt a flutter of nerves in my stomach, but also a surge of confidence. This was why I had come here, after all. To challenge myself, to grow. The presentation went better than I could have hoped. As I fielded questions from the clients, I could see the impressed looks on their faces. When it was over, my boss gave me a thumbs up from across the room. That evening, as I walked home along the bustling streets of San Francisco, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't experienced in years. I was doing it. I was building a new life, on my own terms. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop to find an email from Lisa. She had forwarded me a local Seattle news article. The headline made my heart skip a beat: "Local businessman sentenced in embezzlement case." For a moment, I hesitated, my cursor hovering over the link. Did I really want to know? But curiosity won out, and I clicked. The article detailed Ethan's sentencing. He had pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperating with the investigation. He was looking at several years in prison, plus hefty fines and restitution payments. As I read, I was surprised to find that I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, not even pity. Ethan's choices had led him here, just as my choices had led me to where I was. Our paths had diverged, and I realized I had no desire to look back. I closed the laptop and walked out onto my balcony. The sun was setting over the bay, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I thought about how far I had come, not just in miles, but in personal growth. The next day at work, I overheard some colleagues talking about a local community center that was looking for volunteers to teach art classes. Without hesitation, I signed up. The idea of sharing my newfound passion for painting with others felt right, like another step forward in my journey. My first class was a group of seniors, many of whom had never painted before. As I helped them mix colors and encouraged them to express themselves freely on the canvas, I felt a warmth spreading through me. This was about more than just painting. It was about connection, about helping others find joy and self-expression, just as I had. One of my students, a woman named Dorothy who reminded me a bit of Martha from the Seattle Art Gallery, stayed after class to chat. "You know," she said, her eyes twinkling, "when I signed up for this class, I thought I was too old to learn something new. But you've shown me that it's never too late to start a new chapter." Her words struck a chord with me. It was never too late to start a new chapter. I had proven that to myself, hadn't I? As the weeks turned into months, I found myself settling into a rhythm in San Francisco. Work was challenging but rewarding. My volunteer work at the community center became a highlight of my week. I was making new friends, exploring the city, and slowly but surely, falling in love with my new life. One sunny Saturday, I decided to take a day trip to Napa Valley. As I sat in a beautiful vineyard, sipping a glass of wine and sketching the rolling hills in my notebook, I thought about how different my life was now compared to a year ago. I had gone from feeling trapped and taken for granted to feeling free and valued. From working endless hours to pay off someone else's debt to building a career I was proud of. From losing myself in a relationship to finding myself in art and community service. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. He was going to be in San Francisco for a conference next month and wanted to know if I'd like to meet up. I smiled as I typed my reply. Yes, I'd love to see him. Not because I needed him or anyone else to complete me, but because I was finally in a place where I could share my life with someone as an equal partner. As the sun began to set over the vineyard, casting a golden glow over the landscape, I raised my glass in a silent toast. To new beginnings. To rising from the ashes. To the beautiful, messy, unpredictable journey of life. I had once thought that my happily ever after would look like a perfect marriage, a nice house, and a predictable life. But now I knew that true happiness came from within. It came from facing challenges head-on, from continual growth and self-discovery, from being true to oneself. My story wasn't over. In many ways, it felt like it was just beginning. And I couldn't wait to see what the next chapter would bring. 2 years had passed since I'd moved to San Francisco, and life had settled into a rhythm I never could have imagined back in Seattle. My career was thriving, My volunteer work at the community center had expanded to include organizing art exhibitions for local artists, and I had a close circle of friends who felt more like family. One crisp autumn morning, I was sipping my coffee on my small balcony when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a gallery in San Francisco. They wanted to feature my paintings in an upcoming exhibition. I nearly spilled my coffee in excitement. My hands shaking slightly, I called Lisa, who was still my rock even from hundreds of miles away. "Lisa, you won't believe it," I said as soon as she picked up. "Remember those paintings I've been working on? A gallery wants to show them." "Kaylee, that's amazing." Lisa's voice was filled with genuine joy. "I always knew you had it in you. When's the exhibition?" "Next month," I replied, still in disbelief. "God, I'm nervous already." "You've got this," Lisa assured me. "Hey, why don't I come down for it? I've been meaning to visit you anyway." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I spent every free moment in my makeshift studio, putting the finishing touches on my paintings. Each piece felt like a chapter of my journey, from the dark, chaotic canvases that represented my time with Ethan to the vibrant, hopeful pieces that reflected my new life in San Francisco. The night of the exhibition arrived faster than I could have imagined. I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing down my emerald green dress, not the one from that fateful anniversary dinner, but a new one I had bought specifically for this occasion. It felt like a symbol of how far I'd come. As I entered the gallery, I was immediately enveloped in a sea of faces, some familiar, some new. Lisa was there, beaming with pride. My colleagues from work had shown up to support me. Even some of my students from the community center had come, eager to see their teacher's work. I made my way through the crowd, chatting with guests and answering questions about my paintings. It was surreal to see my work displayed on the pristine white walls of the gallery, to hear people discussing the emotions and stories behind each piece. As I was explaining the inspiration behind one of my more abstract paintings to a group of art enthusiasts, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around to find Alex standing there, a warm smile on his face. "Surprise," he said, handing me a beautiful bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite. "Alex, I can't believe you're here," I exclaimed, genuinely shocked. We had kept in touch over the past 2 years, meeting up whenever he was in San Francisco for business. Our relationship had evolved into a close friendship, with the potential for something more always simmering beneath the surface. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," he replied, his eyes twinkling. "Your work is incredible, Kaylee. You should be proud." As the night wore on, I found myself feeling overwhelmed by the positive response to my art. People were actually buying my paintings. Me, Kaylee Thompson, who 2 years ago couldn't even imagine picking up a paintbrush. Towards the end of the evening, as the crowd was starting to thin out, I noticed a familiar face that made my heart skip a beat. It was Martha, the kind older woman from the art gallery in Seattle who had called me a masterpiece in progress. "Martha," I said, approaching her with a mix of surprise and joy. "What are you doing here?" She turned to me with that same warm smile I remembered. "Kaylee, my dear, when I heard about your exhibition, I just had to come see for myself. And I must say, you've proven me right. You truly are a masterpiece." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged her tightly. "Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." As the exhibition came to a close, I found myself surrounded by my closest friends, Lisa, Alex, and some of the wonderful people I'd met in San Francisco. We decided to continue the celebration at a small jazz club nearby. Sitting there, listening to the smooth saxophone and sipping on a glass of champagne, I felt a profound sense of contentment wash over me. I looked around at the faces of the people who had supported me, believed in me, and helped me become the person I was today. Lisa caught my eye and raised her glass. "To Kaylee," she said, and her quiet triumph. As everyone echoed the toast, I felt a lump form in my throat. Quiet triumph. That's exactly what this was. Not a loud, vengeful victory over those who had wronged me, but a peaceful, personal win over my own doubts and fears. Later that night, as Alex walked me home, we paused on the sidewalk outside my apartment building. The San Francisco night was cool and clear, the stars twinkling above us despite the city lights. "I'm really proud of you, Kaylee," Alex said, his voice soft. "You've come so far." I looked up at him, really looked at him, and felt a warmth spread through my chest. "I couldn't have done it without people like you believing in me," I replied. There was a moment of charged silence, and then Alex leaned in and kissed me. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When we parted, we were both smiling. "Good night, Kaylee," he said, squeezing my hand before turning to leave. As I watched him walk away, I felt a flutter of excitement for what the future might hold. But more than that, I felt a deep sense of peace. Whatever happened with Alex, whatever came next in my career or my art, I knew I would be okay. I had found my strength, my passion, my voice. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of emails and messages congratulating me on the success of the exhibition. As I scrolled through them, one caught my eye. It was from an unknown email address, but the subject line made my heart race. "Congratulations, Ethan." For a moment, my finger hovered over the delete button. Did I want to open this door to the past? But curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked. "Dear Kaylee, I hope this email finds you well. I recently heard about your art exhibition in San Francisco. Congratulations. I always knew you were capable of great things. I'm writing to you from a place of deep reflection. My time in prison has given me ample opportunity to think about my actions and their consequences. I want you to know that I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you. You deserved so much better. I don't expect forgiveness, nor am I asking for it. I simply wanted to acknowledge the hurt I caused and to let you know that I'm glad you found success and happiness. Wishing you all the best, Ethan." I read the email twice, then a third time. A mix of emotions swirled within me: surprise, a twinge of old pain, but mostly, nothing. Ethan's words, his apology, they didn't hold power over me anymore. I closed the email without replying. Maybe someday I would respond, but for now, I was content to leave the past in the past. Instead, I opened my laptop and started researching art therapy programs. My experiences had shown me the healing power of art, and I wanted to explore ways to use my passion to help others who were going through difficult times. As I worked, I glanced at the painting hanging on my living room wall, the abstract piece I had created on my first night in San Francisco. It was a riot of colors and shapes, chaotic yet beautiful. Just like life, I thought with a smile. That afternoon, I met Lisa for lunch at a cute cafe in the Mission District. As we sat in the sun-drenched patio, sharing stories and laughing, I felt a surge of gratitude for this friendship that had weathered so much. "You know," Lisa said, taking a sip of her iced tea, "I was thinking about that night at the restaurant, when Ethan, well, you know. I was so worried about you then. But look at you now. You're thriving, Kaylee." I smiled, remembering how far I'd come. It wasn't easy, I admitted. There were days when I didn't think I'd make it. But I'm glad I didn't give up. "You never gave up," Lisa corrected me. "That's what makes you so amazing." As we finished our lunch, I shared my ideas about art therapy with Lisa. Her eyes lit up with excitement. "Kaylee, that's perfect for you," she exclaimed. "You could help so many people." Her enthusiasm was contagious, and by the time we parted ways, my mind was buzzing with possibilities. I spent the rest of the day researching programs and making plans. That evening, as I stood on my balcony watching the sun set over the San Francisco Bay, I reflected on my journey. From the heartbroken woman who had walked out of that restaurant in Seattle to the confident artist standing here today, it had been quite a transformation. I thought about Ethan's email, about the exhibition, about the kiss with Alex, about my budding plans for the future. Each of these was a thread in the tapestry of my life, weaving together to create something beautiful and uniquely mine. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, I made a silent promise to myself. To always keep growing, to never stop challenging myself, to continue rising from whatever ashes life might throw my way. This was my quiet triumph. Not a single, dramatic moment of victory, but a series of small wins, of daily choices to keep moving forward. It was the triumph of resilience over adversity, of self-love over self-doubt, of hope over fear. And as I stood there, watching the lights of the city begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk, I knew that this triumph was just the beginning. The best was yet to come.